I'm Chris Carter. This is the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, I want to talk about what can George Pickens do this year to be an elite wide receiver. That and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Steelers fans, first and foremost, want to do some housekeeping here. I apologize for there not being a Thursday episode this week. If you saw in the Locked On Steelers Facebook group or on my Twitter account at Carter Critiques, I posted there was a outage in my neighborhood because Pittsburgh got slammed with tornadoes. Luckily, I am safe. My family's safe. Everything worked out. So thank you for all those who sent their well wishes and encouraged me to stay safe. We were able to just kind of camp it out in the dark. But unfortunately, that meant no podcast episodes, but we're back up and running. So let's get right back into it. And I wanted to talk to you about something, analyzing George Pickens, because we're talking a lot about who's going to be the number 2 wide receiver. Why do they need to trade for this guy? They need to trade for that guy. But let's talk about who the Steelers have right here and right now. And we're going to use an analysis database that we've used last year when we talked about both him and Deontay Johnson. And that comes from Matt Harmon's Reception Perception. By the way, Reception Perception, great website. I've subscribed to it. Go subscribe to it. He has breakdowns on almost every receiver in the NFL, updates on them, how they improve, things he studied, and he does great breakdowns. And we're going to include some of the breakdowns in this show, talking about things that he measured as far as how George Pickens did on certain routes versus other routes versus different types of coverage. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, stick around, because there's some really interesting stuff here. But it's important to remember George Pickens, he did take a step up in what he was asked to do this past season. You look at how he performed for the Steelers when he would this past year, and he was able to really turn it on when the Steelers did give him a chance. Last year, the year before, in his rookie season, he had 84 targets, caught 52 of them for 801 yards, and for 4 touchdowns. But this year, that upped significantly. 106 targets, so about just over 20 more there. Had 63 catches, that's 11 more there. But 1,140 yards, that's over 300 more yards. Still only 5 touchdowns, only 1 more touchdown there. But all in all, I think everyone can agree he took steps forward. But let's look at some of the things and the specifics in how he took a step forward. First, let's look at what Matt Harmon did for Reception Perception as far as how he was used in the Steelers offense. And I think this is also what's going to be really interesting, because this is, again, 2 years of Matt Canada's offense. Well, 1.5, because I'd say the second half of the season, or rather like the last 7 games, didn't have Matt Canada. So maybe this is part of what happened here. But let's look at how George Pickens was used in 2023 versus 2022. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, on the left is 2023, on the right is 2022. If you're listening on our audio platforms, don't worry, I got you. So if you look at the breakdowns here, you can see that back in 2022, basically a third of George Pickens' routes were go routes, the 9 route, which is just straight, just go down the field, go get it. And that was kind of, a part of the talk about him was he wasn't much of a route runner. He was great at going and getting the ball, great at just making plays, but he needed to sharpen his routes. Well, he diversified his route tree quite a bit. Now, the go route, the 9 route, was still his number one used route in 2023, but it was down to 23% instead of close to 33%. So a 10% difference there. He also increased how much he increased how much he used the corner routes by a little bit, and the post route by a little bit. The post route he used 5% of the time in 2022 versus almost 9% of the time in 2023. Corners, only a slight jump there, 9.2% from 22 to 10% in 2023. Outs and digs also kind of similar, 7% this year versus 5% the year before, almost 11% this year versus 7% the year before on digs. He used significantly less comeback routes, 5.1% in his rookie year to 1.7 this year, and curl routes as well. Was almost 20% of his routes in 2022. It was down to 13% in his routes in 2023. But the biggest jump that is here and obvious is how much he used the slant. Where last year, or well, it was rookie year, the 20% usage mark was hit by the curl route. This time of this year in 2023, it was hit by the slant route, where he did it almost 21% of the time. That's almost double the 10.7%. Actually, I think that is double. No, because 10.7, you get my point. Almost double twice as much of the usage that he did in his slant routes. And I think that's the interesting part here when you look at his route tree. If you look back at this, and if you're listening here, he did less of the go routes, a little bit more corners, posts, outs and digs, a little bit less curls and comebacks, but significantly more slants. And that tells you, I think that's where they were finding his mojo here. And I'm very interested to see how Arthur Smith works that into his offense as well, because you're going to want to see him used in different ways than in Matt Canada. And if you go back and you look at this and you see slants versus posts and corners, George Pickens is a guy who he's not big as far as thick, but he's lanky. He can go up and get the football. He's fast. He's quick. He's athletic. We've seen him. He can toast people. And if he does sharpen his footwork, if he does become an elite route runner, those posts and corner routes become that much more deadly, because that's where you can create separation with those moves at the second level of the offense. And I think that's where things get even more interesting for the Steelers offenses. For Arthur Smith, how does this change next year? If you're looking at this on YouTube, what do you want to see more? Personally, I think more post routes with George Pickens would be deadly in the Steelers offense, because post routes often they attack the middle part of the field. That's the whole idea, is that they're going towards the post. So you're starting on the outside and cutting to the inside, and you're kind of running towards the field goal post. And that's the essence of the route. But imagine George Pickens getting one-on-one coverage and being able to use the post route and to set up to get a defender to bite to the outside, to open up the inside part of the field. And now Russell Wilson, all he has to do is just lead him just a little bit, and George Pickens can be off to the races. That's where I think if Arthur Smith does anything with George Pickens, he has to get this post route to be used and successfully used more often. I want to get into the success rate and what he did versus different coverages in a second here. We'll do that on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We still got a lot to talk about with George Pickens and the Steelers offense. But first, remind you, this show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you need to download right now on your phone, or go to the website, gametime.co. When you buy tickets to your favorite events, Game Time makes it so that it's not a stressful effort, and where you can book tickets for anything you want, whether they're sporting events, concerts, comedy events, and so many things that are going around wherever you're at. Whether you're looking to score the next home game tickets to see Paul Skeens pitch for the Pittsburgh Pirates, or you're a Steelers fan looking for tickets for next season, the best place to do that is with Game Time. Trust me, I went to see Paul Skeens pitch just last weekend, and man, let me tell you, Pittsburgh has one of the best pitchers we may ever see in this town right now. If you're a fan of sports, you got to go see Paul Skeens. He is that much of a phenom, and Game Time is the place that can help you get those tickets. Also, Locked On Pirates is the place you can listen about it every single day, just like you listen about it here. But Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your events, whether it's Pirate games, Steelers games, or the biggest concerts, comedy, theater events, all those different things available. And you get killer deals even on last minute tickets, and they have a best price guarantee that can't be beat, while you save up to 60% off buying even up to last minute tickets for all those different events. The best price guarantee means that if you find tickets in the same section or row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to the website gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, talking a lot about George Pickens. And I think it's time we focus more on him because he has to be a big part of this offense. How big? Well, let's get into that a little bit more. Now, we looked at the usage rates as far as how he was used in 2023 versus 2022. But let's look at the success rates. And I'll flip to that now on YouTube, and I'll break down what those numbers are for our audio audience here. The success rates, there were some similarities. In 2022, 58% of the time, he on 58% of his 9 routes, his go routes, the straight up go get it balls, he was 58% successful 58% of the time there, 58.2% in 2023. So very similar there. And honestly, that's not surprising. That's what it's kind of supposed to be, right? Because it's just like, hey, there's no route running there. It's just go get the ball. And so that's what George Pickens has been good at. That's what he was going to be good at. The corner route, he took a step up in this past year where he was 75% successful on 75% of his corner routes versus 64% the year before. But he took a dip in his post routes where he was only successful 61.9% of the time in post this year versus 85.7% of the time in 2022. Now, part of that might go back to, I'm going to use a thing here. Part of that might be he used the post route more often this year and maybe just wasn't as used to it because the post route does take your footwork when you're at the second level to get open and to create space and create separation. And that's where maybe the differences came in there. But again, I think that's a big part where if George Pickens gets that part in this Steelers offense, it opens up the big play a lot easier for Russell Wilson and for anybody. And then when you hit on a few of those big plays, it opens up the short passes. It opens up the tight end. It opens up the running game. It does so much for you. Now, let's look at other numbers here. He was still pretty good at hitting and successful in running his out routes 76.5% of the time, but that was less successful than 85.7% in 2022. His digs took a jump up, not by a lot. He was 69% of the time successful. Nice in 2023. 61% success percentful in 2022. And then in both comebacks and curl, he did a better job with those in 2023 versus 2022, as well as running the slant route, which again was his biggest jump in usage, went in doubling the percentage of his usage from 2022 to 2023. He was successful 78% of the time in 23 versus 69% of the time in 2022. Again, nice. But doing this and looking at these numbers, and you're probably thinking like, okay, what does all this mean? Let's look at again where he was most successful in this offense, and you look at the corner route. That's a good sign because corner routes are also dependent on being an elite route runner. If that was something that Antonio Brown, if he was on a corner route, good luck. Like you didn't have much of a chance catching him unless you were sitting on the corner route, because the whole point of the corner route is that you're setting it up so that it could be a 9 route, it could be a post route, it could be an out, it could be a dig, but you're trying to fool the defender so that because the defenders also most of the time, especially in man coverage, they're establishing inside leverage, and when they're establishing inside leverage, that means the corner route is going to the outside. So if you get them to bite hard to the inside, making them think, oh, we got to take away that post because if I give up the post, it's a touchdown. They bite hard. You cut the corner out. You're going towards the sideline. Now there's all this space for the quarterback to throw to. That's often where Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown made their bread. They were just so good at hitting that. Go back and you look at the toe tap that he did against the Packers. I think that was 2017 or 2018. I forget which year that was, but it was one of the later years for Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown. And the corner out was just one of my favorite things to watch Antonio Brown do. If George Pickens can make the corner route a consistent threat that is just a go-to play for the Steelers in the offense, that does so much to make him an elite wide receiver in the future, because then it's one of those things where, like, how do you defend it? And that's where Antonio Brown, I think, would just be so tough to guard. Everyone looked at, the plays where he caught it with one hand, caught it with his hand on his helmet, or he kicked the punter in the face. But what I always looked at was just how well he would get separation, and it would be just enough separation. Sometimes it'd be a lot of separation, but even if it was just enough, he would get it enough so that he could get the space to present himself a target for Ben Roethlisberger, so he could get the toe tap in and make the big play for the Steelers moving the sticks. Because often corner routes are deeper routes. They're going deeper down the field. They're often getting you first downs. And that's where I think that Antonio Brown made his money. That's where George Pickens needs to make more of his money. That's where you need to see a a big step up there. I also think that comebacks and curls, they're certainly part of it, but comebacks and curls are kind of played off of how much they fear you cutting on those deeper routes, or on going posts and going corners, because if they're so worried about that and your speed, they're backing off. And so that when you get sharper in your footwork, which is something Zach Azzanni worked very hard with, and I mean very hard with Zach Azzanni, and I saw him do this with George Pickens. He would literally go up with his hands and he would pound the grass, be like, I need your feet, like bah, 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 or like this, or like kind of like, giving him a drum beat almost. And that's something that I think he was very attentive on trying to get that out of George. And he even said, we showed the interview on the show here weeks ago when we were at Steelers minicamp, that he said, like, George has that potential to be that elite guy. He has to hit it. And I think that's something where it could really work in George Pickens' favor if he works with Azzanni and that comes out of him. Because now let's say that they increase the usage, right, of the post to maybe like 10% to 12%. Maybe that corner rate goes up to 12% as well. So maybe it's a more balanced usage of his different routes to create opportunities beyond the sticks for Russell Wilson to target downfield. So maybe that's there. Now, if they're increasing that usage, but you're also increasing the success rate because he's sharper in his route, what does that do for the Steelers offense? Well, it means that you move the sticks more often. It gives you chances. And, part of what made the Steelers offense great in some of the years with Antonio Brown and Ben Roethlisberger was that there were times where stuff just didn't work, because sometimes you're just schematically beat. Sometimes the defensive front just stuffs your offensive line. Sometimes your running back just gets hit the wrong way. Sometimes a guy drops a pass or the quarterback misses a read. And now all of a sudden it's 3rd and 12. And for the past several years, the Steelers, they're in 3rd and 12. They're dead. Like, that's just, the offense just ain't going nowhere. So now, if George Pickens can be that guy where, let's say 75% to 80% of the time, his corner routes and post routes are successful and his outs and his digs are successful. Like, if they're all in that green area, because again, the perception from Matt Harmon here, they did a great job color coding it to kind of show you like what you want in your success rates here. And it kind of looks like if it's 75% and above, that's the green. That's what you want. If it's 75% and below, it's kind of in the yellow. If it's below, I think 70%, then it's in the red, or so it's close enough to like that. So if George Pickens is able to kind of make that wheel of the 9 route, the post route, the corner route, the out route, the dig route, if all of those can be in the green category where it's like 75% and up percent of the time, he is successful in getting open and making plays with those routes, and he's doing that while also increasing the amount of times that he uses those, then that allows for Arthur Smith to be able to be a little bit more aggressive in what they want to do on earlier downs and also call those plays on earlier downs. And that allows Russell Wilson to be like, hey, you know what? First and second down didn't work. Guess what? We're going to George. And this is where you can kind of mix things up. You can say, hey, Pat Fryman's going to line up in this position. And if teams want to double George Pickens, okay, well, guess what? That's going to open up somebody else. If George Pickens can win those routes consistently, that's where he can command a more attention, and that's where he can truly be an elite threat in the NFL. The other thing is what he does versus different coverages. I want to go over that and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We still got a lot to discuss here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our discussion about George Pickens, and I wanted to get into some of the numbers of how George Pickens performed against different types of coverages over the last 2 years. Again, 2022, rookie year, versus 2023, last year. This being his 3rd year, the year that he's going to need to prove a lot to the Steelers if he wants to be with the team long term. So let's look at some of these numbers. Now, if you're looking at this on your screen, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the numbers. There's man, there's zone, press, and double coverage, and where he fits into that. And I have it labeled there for 2022 and 2023. But let's go through these for our audio listeners who can't see that right now. If you look at how it was broken down in 2022, against man coverage. He faced it 40, almost 41% of the time in his rookie year. He was successful again almost 65% of the time. That was 34th best in the NFL. Compare that to in 2023, he faced man coverage significantly more, 56% of the time, 15% jump there, and was successful a little bit more against it, 68.7% of the time. That was in the 50th. That was 50th best in the NFL as far as success rate. And I thought that was interesting to see there. But where the interesting changes here are in zone coverage as well. George Pickens faced significantly less zone coverage in 2023 versus 2022. It was almost 60% in 22 versus almost 44% in 2023. But he also increased his success rate against the zone, almost 73% in last season versus 68% as a rookie. And then against press coverage, this was kind of similar. He faced press more often, 28% to 21%, but he won just about the same. It was 73, almost 74% to 72% the year before. So not much of a change there. But in double coverages, he looked like he faced almost 3 times as much double coverage, 2.6% of the time in 22 versus 6.3% of the time in 2024. But he also took a serious jump in how often he succeeded against double coverage, 28% in 2022, 46% in 2023. So you look at that line by line, against man, against zone, against press, and against double coverage, George Pickens improved. Granted, press only marginally so, but still improvement is improvement. And that's where I think that George Pickens, if he gets better at his routes, he's going to learn how to beat man coverage. He's going to learn how to fit into zone coverage more often. He's going to get better at beating the press, because a lot of times beating the press, and that was something that Antonio Brown was so good at, was if you pressed him, if you tried to be physical with him, if he got his first step in, you were just out of luck because you weren't squaring him up. He was so good at not presenting his frame. When I say his frame, I mean like his shoulders. When you're lining up as a wide receiver, you don't want the corner to be able to get his hand into your chest, because that's going to stop your momentum. That's going to stop your ability to make different moves. And that's where Antonio Brown was so elite at not letting you get that. He was always moving. His feet were always working, but his chest was always protected because you couldn't square up on him. One of the few people that ever did it was Richard Sherman. And that's one of the reasons Richard Sherman was always a very good cornerback, because he could go through even the elite route runners and run with them. But with George Pickens, that was something that he did struggle with a bit in his rookie season. It was notable when they would play teams. I think the Buffalo Bills were one of them, where like he played them and they kind of just jammed him up and he wasn't able to get loose with it. He got better at it this season, but I think that's where Zach Azzanni is going to have to work with him through the details. And that's one thing I really think could work out for the Steelers if Zach Azzanni and George Pickens start to click. We heard Calvin Austin talk about Azzanni, the new Steelers wide receivers coach, and he talked about how this guy doesn't take no mess. He doesn't take no mess. He's like, if you do something halfway, he tells you to do it again. He does not take it. He's like, not on my time. And the way Calvin Austin said it suggests that the previous receivers coach maybe didn't do that as much. And I think that's where it helps having a guy that is clapping and trying to get your feet to be on rhythm in time to pull off these elite routes, is trying to be very specific to his skill set. And if that's the thing that Zach Azzanni does to challenge George Pickens, then it's up to George Pickens to be like, hey, I'm being challenged. I'm being pushed. And I think this is why the Steelers went and got this kind of a coach, because they want to make sure, like, hey, dig in George's butt. Make sure that he's going to have to go. He either has to sink or swim. They know that he has elite potential. They know that he has the possibility to go and be a superstar wide receiver. But to get there, he has to work on the details. Antonio Brown wasn't always a super detailed player. When he started, he was – he made big plays. He was also much more overlooked than George Pickens, but it took time for him to get elite at running those routes, and that's how he got there. If George Pickens wants to get to that level, which is where I think the Steelers are hoping he can get to, and I think there's legitimate reasons to hope that he has the height, the size, the speed, the hand skills, the athleticism. I think he has all the tools there, but he has to have the want to do the details and the hard parts, and that's where if he does that, that makes him an elite receiver, because then all of a sudden now you can't press him at the line of scrimmage because he's not presenting his chest, and his feet are so tough to lock onto, and he's not telling where his routes are going to go. He's not showing, oh, he's definitely going to the inside or he's definitely going to the outside. I can just play one side or the other. Or I can't press him, so I have to give him space. But now when he has space, he has more space to cook me. So those are all the different things that if George Pickens does those, then he's a star wide receiver. He's already a star wide receiver. Then he's a superstar wide receiver. Then he is in the top 5 conversations, and people will be bringing him up. And when you have a receiver like that, that makes everything else so much easier. It's one thing that Antonio Brown really helped the offense with with the Steelers, even more so than Ben Roethlisberger at times, because he was just so reliable that he could him by himself, he would attract double and triple teams, and it would open up so many other things for other teams. If George Pickens can be that guy, and I'm not saying triple teams, like, again, I'm not saying George Pickens has to be Antonio Brown, because Antonio Brown's 6-year run from, 2013 to 2018 or something like that, that has never been done in the NFL. We may never see that again in the NFL. Asking any receiver to replicate that and be like that is it's like asking me to go out there and be Muhammad Ali all of a sudden. Like that's not fair to anybody. But you can ask him to live up to his potential. And if he lives up to his potential, who knows where he can go? And when you're Arthur Smith and you're this offensive coordinator and you're trying to put this offense together, that's where, if he can be that, then everything else starts to fall into place. Because now, if you have an elite receiver to worry about, if you're a defense, I don't got time to worry about the run game of this offensive line that's supposed to bulldoze. I don't have time to worry about Pat Freiermuth going up the seam. I don't have time to worry about that fast guy Calvin Austin over there, or this Roman Wilson kid who might be clicking by then. Or we even get into the other guys like Darnell Washington, how much time and attention can they give Darnell Washington when George Pickens is commanding the double team, and Freiermuth and Najee Harris and all these other guys, and now Darnell Washington is just in the flat, or he's just running the fade into the end zone when they're in the red zone. You're going to have to not only put like your 3rd, 4th, 5th best cover man on him, you're going to be lucky to keep up with him at that point. That's where Pickens being a superstar wide receiver can truly make the difference. And that's why I wanted to bring up these specifics to show you that he did improve from 22 to 2023. I think that he took steps forward, but he has to take bigger steps forward this year. He knows what's in front of him. He has coaches that are challenging him directly on these things. And I think that's going to be the bigger difference. If he responds to that well, we'll see this jump. If he takes a slight jump, who knows? Maybe he's responding to it, but it's taking time for him to get the details in. But if he stays at where he was last year, that's going to be a problem for the Steelers long term. And I think that's where you're going to see the Steelers be like, may need to reach back into the NFL draft for a high draft pick at wide receiver to find the future there. Or maybe they will need to trade for a Brandon Ayuk or someone like that. But I think the ball is completely in the hands of George Pickens to determine which way the Steelers go there. We'll talk more about that next week. Again, thank you for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see you here again Monday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.